Hey, LA peeps, how you doing today? It's Mr. Wells. Um, Nice to see all of you. Um, we've been talking about the move toward freedom, literature from the Civil War. What you want to do is you want to get your notes out. Those are ELA guided notes for the move toward freedom. They've been posted on Google Classroom. For the remote students, I know they'll be posted here with this video as well. And, um, and so you can look at those this way, but we're just continuing to use those notes throughout this unit. Last time we talked about Frederick Douglass, and so far you read two stories about Frederick Douglass, and you should have learned that Frederick Douglass was a slave when he was a boy, grew up a slave. Later, when he got his freedom, he became a campaigner for abolition to try to educate people about slavery so that slavery could be abolished. And then later, he became so famous that even President Lincoln knew who he was and called him his friend. So there's a couple assignments there that you're working on about Frederick Douglass, and you want to just be mindful of those assignments. But today we're going to be switching to talking about someone else. We're going to talk about Harriet Tubman. I don't know what you know about Harriet Tubman, but Harriet Tubman was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. The story for the remote students, the story is attached here. If the Those of you who are in class, you should still be able to find it there on your Google Classroom somewhere. It's probably attached to the assignment questions as well. So you'll want to look through that. In this video, I'm going to actually go through and read the story with you and talk a little bit about it with you. But Harriet Tubman was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, which helped escaped slaves get to their freedom in the years before the Civil War. Now let's get one thing straight. The Underground Railroad was not underground and it was not a railroad. Okay, this is just a figure of speech. It's an expression. Underground is another word for secret. So this was done in secret. They did not want the slave owners to know about it. They did not want the general public to know because they were breaking the law by escaping. So that's the underground part of the secret. The railways were just a very common form of transportation. And if you get on a train, you're on the railroad, and there are different stations where there are stops. Same way with the Underground Railroad. For the most part, they're walking in the dead of night. And sometimes they would use rafts or something on the rivers and things like that. But they're not usually taking a train. But they are being transported from one place to another. And so it was called the Underground Railroad. And the people who helped the escaped slaves were called conductors. Just like in a railroad, the conductor helps passengers on and off the train. The Underground Railroad, these conductors helped slaves get to where they needed to be. Now, in the early days of the Underground Railroad, they would take people from the slave states, which are in the South, and take them into the North. But in later years, there was a problem because as the fight over slavery kept intensifying and more slaves were escaping and more people were advocating for slaves' freedom, the people in the South decided that we needed to enforce what they considered the law, which was in the Constitution of the United States. It said, that if you have stolen property and it goes across state lines, that other state has an obligation to return that property. And in these days, slaves were considered property. All right. So it got to the point where they passed what was called the Fugitive Slave Law, which required the free states to send back any escaped slaves. And as a matter of fact, they also offered a $1,000 reward if you could bring an escaped slave back. And $1,000 now would be like 100,000, or 1,000 then be like 100,000 now. It's a lot of money. Some people, they made their whole living by capturing escaped slaves. In fact, some of them just kidnapped free African Americans and lied and said they were slaves and sent them back into slavery in order to try to claim the reward. So there was no place in the United States where it was completely safe for an escaped slave. And so they started taking them all the way up into Canada. Not until they crossed the border into Canada would they be totally free. Well, Harriet Tubman was involved in this. Let's go ahead. Let's start reading it together. Along the eastern shore of Maryland, in Dorchester County, in Caroline County, the masters kept hearing whispers about the man named Moses, who was running off slaves. At first, they did not believe in his existence. The stories about him were fantastic, unbelievable. Yet they watched for him. They offered rewards for his capture. They never saw him. Now and then, they heard whispered rumors to the effect that he was in the neighborhood. The woods were searched. The roads were watched. There was never anything to indicate his whereabouts. But a few days afterward, a goodly number of slaves would be gone from the plantation. Neither the master nor the overseer had heard or seen anything unusual in the quarter. Sometimes one or the other would vaguely remember having heard a whippoorwill call somewhere in the woods, close by, late at night, though it was the wrong season for whippoorwills. Sometimes the masters thought they heard a cry of a hoot owl repeated, and would remember having thought that the intervals between the low moaning cry were wrong, that had been repeated 4 times in succession instead of 3. There was never anything more than that to suggest that all was not well in the quarter. Yet, when morning came, they invariably discovered that a group of the finest slaves had taken to their heels. So, as we're looking at this, one of the things that occurs here, one of the things that happens is that, this is written from a third-person point of view. Do you remember third-person point of view? It's where the narrator is writing about someone else, not themselves. So using pronouns like he, she, it, them, instead of we or I, like in first person. This is a biography of Harriet Tubman. Now, you've already written autobiography in your notes, which was an account of the writer's own life featuring real people and actual events. This is a biography. A biography is a true account of a person's life that is told by someone other than the subject. A biography is a true account of a person's life that's told by someone other than the subject. You'll want to get that definition in your notes. And this is a biography. And in this biography, we're going to learn about Harriet Tubman. She didn't write this. In fact, a lady named Ann Petrie wrote this about Harriet Tubman. Okay, but the story is about her, and so we call it a biography. Did you notice here, though, what's going on so far? Here you got, the masters. Why are these slaves escaping? How are they getting away? And we heard this guy named Moses. Moses is around. Who is he? Where does he come from? Does he really exist? And you think, well, we heard a whippoorwill sound the other day. But it's not the season for whippoorwills. Was that really a bird? Was it a bird? Or was it a signal? Was it someone trying to send a coded message to the slaves? Well, they would sort of wonder about these things and always wonder, who was Moses? How was he taking these people away? Just like the story of Moses in the Bible was a story about a man who brought the Israelites out of slavery. This Moses was going to bring African Americans out of slavery as well. Unfortunately, the discovery was almost made on a Sunday. Thus, a whole day was lost before the machinery of pursuit could be set in motion. The posters offering rewards for the fugitives could not be printed until Monday. The men who made a living hunting for runaway slaves were out of reach, often in the woods with their dogs and their guns in pursuit of 4-footed game, or they were in camp meetings saying their prayers with their wives and families beside them. Harriet Tubman could have told them that there was far more involved in this matter of running off slaves and signaling the would-be runaways by imitating the call of a whippoorwill or a hoot owl, or far more involved in a matter of waiting for a clear night when the North Star was visible. In December 1851, when she started out with a band of fugitives that she planned to take to Canada, she had been in the vicinity of the plantation for days, planning the trip, carefully selecting the slaves that she would take with her. She had announced her arrival in the quarter by singing the forbidden spiritual, Go Down, Moses, Way Down to Egypt Land, singing it softly outside the door of a slave cabin late at night. The husky voice was beautiful, even when it was barely more than a murmur borne on the wind. This is what we call characterization. Characterization is a technique that authors use to reveal what a person is like. Um, they reveal what a person is like through their actions or how that person is seen by others. So, characterization is when you reveal what a person is like, their actions, or how that character is seen by others. What do I mean by that? Well, the author could have very simply said, Harriet Tubman was a kind woman with a deep voice. Harriet Tubman worked to get escaped slaves. Well, all those things are true. But she's showing what Harriet Tubman did. She's describing her actions. She's describing the way people thought about her. And this is a much more interesting way to portray who Harriet Tubman is. This is part of also what's called author's craft. Author's craft refers to the method authors use to make their writing lively and vivid. The method authors use to make their writing lively and vivid is called author's craft. So, I noticed a lot of students, a lot of you, you just very simply want to introduce the stories you write. When I ask you to write about your family, you say, right now I'm going to talk about my family. But it would be a lot more interesting if you could do it in a different way. If you could start and say, my family are some of the strangest people I know. Well, that kind of got my attention. Or what someone told me today. My family puts the fun in dysfunction. Now that's funny, it's humorous, and it kind of draws you in. Author's craft is something that draws us in to what we're doing, draws us in to the story, and that's what makes part of what makes the story worth reading. Once she had made her presence known, word of her coming spread from cabin to cabin. The slaves whispered to each other, ear to mouth, mouth to ear, Moses is here. Moses has come. Get ready, Moses is back again. The ones who had agreed to go north with her put ash cake and salt herring on an old bandana, hastily tied it into a bundle, and then waited patiently for the signal that meant it was time to start. There were 11 in this party, including one of her brothers and his wife. It was the largest group she had ever conducted, but she was determined that more and more slaves should know what freedom was like. She had to take them all the way to Canada. Fugitive slave law was no longer a great many incomprehensible words written down in the country's law books. The new law had become a reality. It was Thomas Sims, a boy, picked up on the streets of Boston at night and shipped back to Georgia. It was Jerry and Shadrach, arrested and jailed with no warning. She had never been to Canada. The route beyond Philadelphia was strange to her, but she could not let the runaways who accompanied her know this. As they walked along, she told them stories of her own first flight. She kept painting vivid word pictures of what it would be like to be free, but there were so many of them this time. She knew moments of doubt when she was half afraid and kept looking back over her shoulder, imagining that she heard the sound of pursuit. They would certainly be pursued. 11 of them. $11,000 worth of flesh and bone and muscle that belonged to Maryland planters. If they were caught, the 11 runaways would be whipped and sold south. She would probably be hanged. They tried to sleep during the day, but they never could wholly relax into sleep. She could tell by the positions they assumed by their restless movements. And they walked at night. Their progress was slow. It took them 3 nights of walking to reach the first stop. She told them about the place there where they would stay, promising warmth and good food, holding these things out to them as an incentive to keep going. when she knocked on the door of a farmhouse, a place where she and her parties of runaways had always been welcome, always been given shelter and plenty to eat. There was no answer. She knocked again, softly. A voice came from within, said, "Who is it?" There was fear in the voice. She knew instantly that from the sound of the voice that there was something wrong. She said, "A friend with friends," the password on the Underground Railroad. The door opened slowly. The man who stood in the doorway looked at her coldly, looked with unconcealed astonishment and fear at the 11 disheveled runaways who were standing near her. Then he shouted, "Too many, too many. It's not safe. My place was searched last week. It's not safe." Slammed the door in her face. She turned away from the house, frowning. She had promised her passengers food and rest and warmth, and instead of that, there would be hunger and cold and more walking over the frozen ground. Somehow, she would have to instill courage into these 11 people, and most of them would have to feed them, most of them strangers, would have to feed them on hope and bright dreams of freedom instead of the fried pork and cornbread and milk she had promised them. Hey, this is an example of parallelism. It's a little hard to spot here, but you could write in your notes. Parallelism are grammatical structures that are repeated to show rhythm and emphasize similar ideas. Grammatical structures that are repeated to show rhythm and emphasize similar ideas. Here, what we're looking at is just her using the term "would have" more than once. She would have to instill the courage. She would have to feed them. Sometimes it's a lot more noticeable. A lot of times we see this in poetry. The number of syllables, the number of words in each line have to be matched up with another line. Some of you remember the limericks that I posted during the days when we were all on remote learning, and whenever I was doing that, I had to watch out. I'm trying to write that. I have to make sure that there's only a certain number of words in each line, and it matches up with that line. Otherwise, it doesn't flow. Well, that's parallelism. That's parallelism. They stumbled along behind her, half dead for sleep, and she urged them on, though she was as tired and as discouraged as they were. She'd never been in Canada, but she kept painting wondrous word pictures of what it would be like. She managed to dispel their fear of pursuit so that they would not become hysterical, panic-stricken. Then she had to bring home some of the fear back so that they would stay awake and keep walking, though they drooped with sleep. Yet during the day, when they lay down in a deep thicket, they never really slept, because if a twig snapped or the wind sighed in the branches of a pine tree, they jumped to their feet, afraid of their own shadows, shivering and shaking. It was very cold, but they dared not make fires because someone would see the smoke and wonder about it. She kept thinking, 11 of them, $11,000 worth of slaves, and she had to take them all the way to Canada. Sometimes she told them about Thomas Garrett in Wilmington. She said he was their friend, even though he did not know them. He was the friend of all fugitives. He called them God's poor. He was a Quaker, and his speech was a little different from that of other people. His clothing was different too. He wore the wide-brimmed hat that the Quakers wear. I don't know if you've ever seen the guy on the front of the Quaker Oats box, Quaker oatmeal box. That's what this guy would have looked like. Okay, that particular style of clothing is what Quakers wore. By the way, that'll be our password. Prove to me that you watched this video. If you're in my ELA class, email me for your participation points. Email me just in the subject line, Quaker Oats. Quaker Oats. That's all I need. Quaker Oats. You get participation for watching this video. Thank you. And she said he had the thick white hair, soft, almost like a baby's, and the kindest eyes she'd ever seen. He was a big man and strong, but he never used his strength to harm anyone, always to help people. He would give all of them a new pair of shoes, everybody. He always did. Once they reached his house in Wilmington, they would be saved. He would see to it that they were. She described the house where he lived, told them about the store where he sold shoes. She said he kept a pail of milk and a loaf of bread in the drawer of his desk, so that he would have food ready at hand for any of God's poor who should suddenly appear before him, fainting with hunger. There was a hidden room in the store. A whole wall swung open, and behind it was a room where he could hide fugitives. On the wall there were shelves filled with small boxes, boxes of shoes, so that you would never guess that the wall actually opened. While she talked, she kept watching them. They did not believe her. She could tell by their expressions. They were thinking, new shoes, Thomas Garrett, Quaker, Wilmington. What foolishness was this? Who knew if she told the truth? Where was she taking them anyway? Would you have believed her? I mean, that's a good question to ask. I mean, here she was. She'd already told them in at least one place that they were going to get food and shelter, and they were turned away. Now she's telling them about this guy in Wilmington that not only is he going to take them in, he's going to give them all a brand new pair of shoes, and he even has a hidden room as a bedroom that they can use, and they can sleep inside. At this point, do they trust her? Will they keep following her? And if they don't, what will happen? That night they reached the next stop, a farm that belonged to a German. She made the runaways take shelter behind trees at the edge of the fields before she knocked at the door. She hesitated before she approached the door, thinking, suppose that he too should refuse shelter. Suppose. Then she thought, Lord, I'm going to hold steady onto you, and you've got to see me through, and knocked softly. She heard the familiar guttural voice say, who's there? She answered quickly, a friend with friends. He opened the door and greeted her warmly. How many this time? He asked. 11, she said, and waited, doubting, wondering. He said, good, bring them in. He and his wife fed them in the lamp-lit kitchen, their faces glowing as they offered food and more food, urging them to eat, saying there was plenty for everybody. Have more milk, have more bread, have more meat. They spent the night in the warm kitchen. They really slept all that night until dusk the next day. When they left, it was with reluctance. They had all been warm and safe and well fed. It was hard to exchange the security offered by that clean, warm kitchen for the darkness and cold of a December night. Hey, I'm going to cut the video off here because the length, I think, is going too long. I'm afraid that my program is going to cut me off here. But I'll post the next part of the story. And for those of you who are remote students, that one will be the one that has the assignment on it. So you'll need to watch this, of course, watch the next one as well. Make sure you're filling out the notes. Hey, make sure that you hit like, you hit subscribe, enable your notifications so you can see all my wonderful videos. I'll talk to you when this story concludes.